This is the soil fertility or nutrient management stop for the day, and I'm going to just try to cover some of the work that we're doing here at the station, as well as some of the developments that we've had as far as nutrient management in corn and soybeans. So first, I want to thank all the support that's contributed to the research that I'm going to be talking about today. And so that's going to include the Soil Test Review Board, the Arkansas Soybean Promotion Board, as well as the Arkansas Corn and Grain Sorghum Promotion Board. And I wanted to recognize all of the contributors to this work over the years. And so if we think about the nutrient management tools we have available for corn and soybean in Arkansas, we've got corn and soybean here. We've got calibrated soil test. And what that means is we've got reliable information based on soil testing that we can predict pre-plant fertilizer rates. So that's an important start. That's getting off on the right foot, knowing that you can put out a reliable amount of pre-plant fertilizer to maximize yield. But one thing I've learned is I provide recommendations. That doesn't mean producers always follow them, right? And what that means is we've got to have tools throughout the season where producers can come back and make adjustments, either if they go with a lower rate than was recommended, or if they have issues like 32 inches of rain from the time they applied their fertilizer until they get the crop planted, right? So there's those unknowns that we can't always predict. Another big tool that I want to remind everybody about is our economic potash rate calculator. So in years like this where we have depressed crop values and we still have relatively high fertilizer costs, this economic potash rate calculator allows you to take your soil test values, it allows you to take your cost of fertilizer, your projected commodity price, and get the most economical potash rate possible. So that can really help you fine-tune those rates to make sure you're maximizing your profit return to potash fertilizer. When we start to look at in-season tissue tests, for corn we have one established, and for potassium we have one in progress. For soybean, I apologize, this is a copy and paste error. We do have one established for soybean, and what we're doing with postseason tissue tests in corn is we have a stock nitrate test which is established, and we're actually working on a stock K tool that would allow you to take that stock piece at the end of the season, and it would actually tell you whether or not potash was deficient at any point during the season. And unfortunately, it's at the end of the year, but you have to think of it kind of like a report card of saying how well you did or how well you managed both nitrogen and potash during the season. And the real goal is a calibrated tissue test. And what a calibrated tissue test is it acts just like a soil test. And what I mean is, if I have a calibrated test, when I get a concentration either from the soil or the plant, I can use that to predict the exact rate of fertilizer that's needed to correct it. And what that does is that prevents under-application or over-application of fertilizer, and what it should do is maximize the return on that investment. So this is some of the work that has been going on for quite a while. In soybean, we're a little bit further along than we are in corn. And all this is to remind you of the window of opportunity that we have to manage potash in soybean. And so if you look at this upper line where we have mild to moderate deficiency, or we call it hidden hunger, you have R1 plus about 44 days to make a potash application and still maximize your yield potential. For this yellow line, this is what we would consider, severe or visible deficiency symptoms. And you can see when we have those extreme deficiencies, our window of opportunity to manage potash is quite a bit shorter. And so we really only have about R1 to about 21 days after R1 to put out potash. But if you stop and think for a second, that is a huge window where you can apply potash and still maximize your yield potential. Traditionally we always thought, if I don't get it out pre-plant, I'm already losing yield. Well, this research with potash is showing us not only in corn and soybeans, but other crops, that we've really got well into the reproductive stages to apply potash and still maximize our yield potential. This is just an example of some of that in-season management. So here we were looking at field variability of tissue K concentration in soybean. So the hot spots or the red spots here would be deficient in potash. And what we did was we went in and we just kind of measured that field variability, and we found all these spots that were deficient in K, and we applied 60 pounds of K2O at the R2 growth stage. And when we came back at the R4 stage, you can see that all of that deficiency had been corrected. And so what that tells us is that if we can identify the deficiencies in a timely manner and apply potash fertilizer, we can effectively eliminate all those deficiencies pretty quick. And so in this particular field, we were able to identify it, we were able to make an application, and we were able to basically recover full yield potential in that field using these tools that we've developed. This is kind of the end goal that we want with our tissue testing. And this is something that we're working to finalize, but our current recommendation for soybean is that if you have a deficiency, you just put out a blanket rate of 60 pounds of K2O per acre. And what this is telling us is that based on that tissue concentration that we measure in the plant, we can tell you the exact potash rate that you need to not only maximize your yield, but to maximize that return on investment. And so what you'll see is if right here is about 60 pounds of K2O per acre, there's a lot of situations where that would be too much potash. And so what this does is it gives us a pinpoint site-specific potash rate for in-season management. And a lot of times we can get by with much lower rates than that traditional blanket application of 60 that we've been looking at. So not only does it allow us to apply less fertilizer, it allows us to increase that return on our fertilizer investment. So one of the other tools that I want to talk about real quick is a combination of our nitrogen management tools in corn. So this is actually data from the study that's just behind me. And part of the purpose of this study is to compare our standard approaches of 2- and 3-way splits in corn to using some of these tools that we've developed, with the idea being that these tools should give us site-specific fertilizer rate recommendations. And over at the end is really where I want to draw your attention, the season total N rate that was predicted using these tools. So if you think about this field, we would recommend 220 units of nitrogen per acre in either a 2-way or a 3-way split. And what we're doing here is looking to see what these tools are telling us is actually needed for this specific field location. And the biggest thing that should jump out to you is that all of our tools predicted significantly lower season total nitrogen rates than what just our standard approach would be. And so we're not quite to, R5 yet, but when you go and look out here, you cannot tell the difference between where I have this 130 pound of N per acre rate and these standard rates of 220. So at least at this point in the season, it appears these tools are doing a really good job of predicting that site-specific nitrogen rate, which could allow us to get by with a significant reduction in our fertilizer, specifically nitrogen fertilizer rates for corn, and still maximize production. One of the last things that I'll talk about here real quick is just our corn response to fertilizer K application timing. And so if you think about one of those first graphs I showed you about the window of opportunity for applying potash in soybean, this is the work to develop that same curve for corn. And if you look across here, we just have corn grain yield and these different application times with essentially our untreated and then V6 through very late season R2 applications going from left to right. And what you'll see is that for these two sites that were responsive, where we needed potash, we got basically maximal yield potential with a VT application. And so if we start to define that window of opportunity for potash application in corn, all our data is saying as long as you get your potash out by VT, you can maximize your yield potential. So once again, moving towards those steps of giving producers, clearly defined windows of opportunity to manage the nutrient, and then additional tools to where they can use tissue tests to say, okay, based on the plant tissue concentration, what are those rates that are needed to maximize yield and productivity. I appreciate once again all the support from the promotion boards, and I'd be happy to answer a couple of questions if we have time. Yes, sir.
You want to start with grid sampling? Do you have more accurate areas of deficiency in your field from a soil sampling standpoint?
Okay, so the question is basically a composite soil sample versus a grid soil sample. My recommendation on that is it depends on what you want to use the grid sampling for. So if you want to do variable rate applications, then grid sampling is great. But what I would say is with these in-season tools, what we've found is the tissue concentrations don't always follow those soil test grid concentrations. So that field, they don't always correlate. So like that field I show you had been grid sampled, and the low spots for soil test K did not always correlate to the low spots of tissue K. So I think they're kind of independent. If you want to use your grid soil sampling for applications, that's great, but it's not really going to have an impact on our tissue tests.
The tissue sampling itself, like 100-acre fields, how many locations for accurate tissue analysis?
So the question is how many samples per field? So I would say management zones. What we found in this research is we need a minimum of 18 samples per management zone, and it's kind of size independent. So whether you're a 20-acre field or a 100-acre field, that's the number that will get you within the average of that area or that management zone. So 18 samples.
Randomized across the entire zone?
Yes, sir. Randomized across your field or your management zone. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll be here the rest of the day. If you want to catch me at lunch or any other time, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.